Have you ever recorded audio for a video and you did 15 minutes of recording, went to edit it together and realized you never plugged in your main microphone? Yeah, it sucks. Take two. Before we get on with the review, I have something I want to point out about Adventure 2 for the 5200 and XE line of computers that I didn't know until I purchased the 5200 version and started looking into it. Originally, the game was going to use the title Quest for the Golden Chalice, as there was fear of the Atari legal department putting an end to the obvious 2600 Adventure sequel. But something was worked out between the developer and Atari that allowed them to use the Adventure 2 name officially, as long as some of the work from the developer was provided to enable a 2600 flashback version of Adventure 2. I heard that Kurt Vendel, whom we discussed in my 7800 flashback video, that I'll have a link to in the description somewhere, facilitated this to an extent. If this is true, it shows once again what a great link he was between Atari and the rest of the community. But the developer also stated that the whole deal left a bad taste in their mouth. I'm not 100% sure why, as he doesn't seem to go into it a whole lot, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Still, I thought it was awesome that the developers at Square Trio were able to get permission to use the name from Atari. But despite that cool tidbit, is it actually worth playing? Or should you just learn about it here at the Atari Network? Which you should subscribe to, by the way. Let's find out. The first thing that caught my attention was how awesome the graphics looked. It's a great mixture of the classic adventure sprites, such as the square player sprite and the duck-looking dragons, along with the updated backgrounds, enemies, castles, and other various components. It all comes together very well, and looks like what I would imagine an official 5200 release of Adventure 2 would have looked like in 1983, or something like that. You explore a minimum of 2 kingdoms, but you can have up to a maximum of 4, and they all feel varied, different, and each have their own charms. If you happen to remember the original release year of the 2600 game, then you can even change up the player sprites to something that looks perfect for the rest of the upgraded visuals, or even something silly, like a crab. They do look nice, but some of the sprites are honestly too large for the environments and get stuck easily. Still, it's a nice bonus regardless. The sound follows the example of the graphics and manages to feel familiar, but with new updated components. I love the song that plays at the intro screen and at various points of the adventure, but I was disappointed that more music wasn't included. It would have been nice to have a background loop, or at least the option to play one, but maybe the lack of music will make it more authentic to the original for some people. The rest of the sound effects are fine, but some border on being annoying, especially when you're taking repeated hits from a dragon or another enemy. But still, the real question should be, did they manage to keep the gameplay true to the original, but still expand it in fun and innovative ways? And the answer is mostly yes. If you like the gameplay of Adventure, then you'll feel right at home here. And there's even all the same items as far as I can remember. You have your sword, the magnet, the bridge, keys, and of course the chalice, along with new stuff like a shield, bad eggs that allow you to fly across the environment, and planks that let you build bridges. And much like the original, you can change up the game modes to make things short and sweet with minimal items to deal with, or large and expansive with a whole variety of things to contend with. The dragons are persistent and as terrifying as ever if they catch you without your sword, but they also added a troll who will steal your items from you and put them elsewhere on the map, and a minotaur who you want to avoid at all costs, or else he'll kick you back to another area completely, negating your progress to that point and forcing you to work your way back to where you was. These new enemies are slightly irritating, but I found them to be clever additions overall, and they add some more strategy and challenge without overshadowing the ever-present dragons. In every one of the 22 different modes, you'll explore the Seashore Kingdom and the Green Kingdom, and these two are the most welcoming of the 4, as you would imagine. The Seashore Kingdom is always where you start, but you'll have to discover a key to enter the Seashore Castle, and grab the next key for the Green Kingdom. The Green Kingdom is the most difficult area in the easier modes. There you have to contend with a hedge maze that houses the Minotaur and Troll. If you manage to avoid the Minotaur and the Troll in the maze, along with the dragons, then you'll enter the castle and track down the chalice. Once you bring it safely home, your quest is over, and you'll receive a ranking based on how well you did. I recommend practicing on this mode for a bit before trying your hand at the full map, because things become much larger when you introduce the Ice Kingdom and the Dark Kingdom. but it's a welcome challenge once you get good at the game. Overall, there's a lot to do and play here, and conquering everything is rewarding, and familiar to the original, which is what most players will want. The 5200 retail library is already fairly solid in my opinion, but this game is a welcome addition, and something I think all 5200 fans should give a try. Overall, I feel it was a great first homebrew game for me to get, and I would recommend it as being a good place to start for other people too. That's why I decided to give Adventure 2 for the Atari 5200 4 rebuilt controllers out of 5. I was very close to giving this game a perfect 5, but it barely missed out on that score. And I'll tell you why here in a second, but let's get to the good things first. The game is a great continuation of Adventure on the 2600, and the large number of different modes will make sure that you can come back to this one often. Each of the kingdoms are unique, and the graphics manage to feel familiar, but also updated in clever ways. The dragons and new enemies each offer a unique challenge, and are clever in their implementation. There's also a nice variety of items and secrets as well. But the reason I couldn't give this game a perfect score is twofold. First is the sound. I like the music I hear, but having the option for a background loop would have been nice. Also, the sound effects of the dragon biting you can be a little harsh. But more importantly, you tend to get stuck on the walls and the environment a lot, especially if you're using the bonus sprites. But it happens more than I'd like with the standard normal square sprite. I get stuck on pieces of the environment way too often, and a lot of the game is in tight quarters, so it feels bad getting hung up on something and then being killed by a dragon. It didn't prevent me from enjoying the game, but I felt it was reason enough not to call the game perfect. But it was close, let me tell you. But now I want to know what you think in the comments below. Have you played Adventure 2 on the 5200 or the XE computers? Do you agree with my score? And even if you haven't played the game, do you think my reasoning for not giving it a perfect score is justified? Let me know your thoughts on Adventure 2, or even the original, in the comments below. And also, have you tried the 2600 version of Adventure 2 that was made available on one of the flashbacks? You know, the version that essentially allowed this one to keep the Adventure name? How is that compared to this one? Let me know about that as well. But that's enough for today, guys. This has been the 7800 Pro System Gamer on behalf of the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. Keep it classy, adventurers. From the first time I laid eyes on Gremlins for the Atari 5200, I knew that it was a game I would probably really enjoy. All the sprites looked excellent, portraying the iconic Mogwai and Gremlins perfectly, and the main player sprite looked absolutely incredible compared to many of the other games at the time. I personally wasn't a huge fan of the Gremlins movies, but I didn't hate them either, so it wasn't the subject matter that drew me into this game. It wasn't just the graphics either, but something about the gameplay really seemed to draw me in. Watching others play the game, I just had a feeling that it would be fun and addictive. So, was my feelings right? Is this a great game for the Atari 5200 Super System, or was I blinded by the good-looking graphics and sprites? Let's find out. Upon powering the game on, and after getting through the Atari splash screen, you're greeted with a nice rendering of a gremlin's head and a few options. You can choose between 1 or 2 players and select which level you start at, somewhere between 1 and 23. I always found it weird that the game defaults to level 3, but I guess the first 2 levels are pretty easy. But if they're so easy that they recommend skipping them, then why have them at all? I guess maybe there's sort of a tutorial or training levels? That's probably it. Anyway, after selecting the number of players and level, you're dropped into the chosen night and the game begins. You take your character in any of 8 directions, up, down, left, right, along with all the diagonals, and you attempt to rescue all the cute little Mogwai before they are transformed into slimy gremlins. They transform when they touch food, and you'll have no choice but to slash them with your sword at that point. I really like the look of your sword, and it has a nice weighty feel to it when you swing it. But its range is extremely short, requiring you to get in close to the gremlins, much closer than you might be comfortable with. And because they change directions quickly, it's very likely you could lose a life any time you enter a battle. You also have a screen flash item that you can use by pressing the top fire button, and that will make all the enemies and Mogwai stand still for a couple of seconds. It doesn't last long, but it's absolutely required if you want to make it very far in this game. There's also a lot going on in the environments, and the Gremlins and Mogwai interact with the environments often, which is a nice touch. You have the television that they can turn on, and anything that's near it becomes enthralled with whatever is playing on the TV, making them easier targets. There are also refrigerators that shoot ice cubes out of the freezer and onto the floor. This can be a good or bad thing, as those ice cubes eventually melt and become a puddle of water. You don't slide around on the water or anything like that, but it causes the Mogwai or Gremlins to duplicate, creating two where there was once one. Again, the more Mogwai to save and rescue, the higher your score at the end of each stage. But the more Gremlins, the harder the level is. And Mogwai can become Gremlins at any time, meaning that if they double up on Mogwai, they could eventually become doubled up on Gremlins. Also, Gremlins can get into the refrigerator and throw food all over the levels to try and get more Mogwai to transform into Gremlins. This interaction is really cool, and it makes a lot of sense to me. There's also a popcorn popper that works similarly to the fridge, but it does nothing until one of the Mogwai or Gremlins touch it. The popcorn popper is infinitely more annoying than the fridge, and once it starts spitting kernels, well, all the Mogwai are going to become your enemies, unless you act quickly. You'll want to collect all the food that's being thrown about the level and the food that spawns right from the start, as not only will it add to your points, but it keeps the Mogwai from eating them. You also have the Mogwai pen in the upper right corner of every level. Touch it once to close the pen, and then drop off all the Mogwai you can in there. You can only carry one Mogwai at a time, so you'll be making multiple trips here each level. But once again, the mischievous Gremlins can interact with this thing as well. They'll attempt to open it and release all your friends that you've already saved. This can be annoying tracking them all back down, but it can be extremely annoying when a Gremlin gets stuck up there, constantly interacting with the door, causing the sound effect to trigger endlessly. Ugh, talk about audio that's hard on the ears. This is bad, but it only seems to happen on the harder levels in my experience. Speaking of audio, the songs and intro themes that play are pretty good. Most of the sound effects work well too, and I find it all to be decent, if not a little bit sparse at times. Background music wasn't quite commonplace yet, but it would have been nice to have some here. The graphics on the player character and all the enemies, items, furniture, and Mogwai are excellent in my opinion. The walking cycles are fine, and I really like the look of the Gremlins when they're facing downward. They look extremely evil and menacing. However, the plain black background is pretty boring. It would have been nice to have backdrops to display different rooms around the house, like a kitchen, dining room, living room, garage, attic, etc. The black void of the background just makes this game feel older than it really is. There isn't a ton of variety, but they do make a commendable effort at changing things up between levels. Obviously, the level designs change between each night, as the walls, appliances, food, puddles, and enemies are shifted, removed, and replaced between each level. You also have levels that give you a short period of time to rescue all the Mogwai with no enemies. Levels where you're surrounded by nothing but Gremlins and have to kill them all to proceed. And levels that are just jam-packed with stuff on the screen, among other things. But it's clear that those jam-packed levels are taxing the 5200, as they take a noticeably longer time to load, and some slowdown is present while playing these levels. The first time this happened, I thought maybe my cartridge was dirty, or the game had crashed. But be patient, it's just taking longer to load and render the impressive amount of objects on the screen. Overall, Gremlins is a fun and unique game on the Atari 5200 Super System, and is a welcome addition to the library. It looked and played as well as I imagined it would when I first laid eyes on it. That's why I'm going to give Gremlins for the Atari 5200 Super System 4 rebuilt 5200 controllers out of 5. It's a fun arcade-style game with some decent variety in level design, excellent sprite work, good audio, enemies that interact with the environment, and the fact that swinging your sword feels really good with good weight behind it. The cons are the black backgrounds honestly being boring, and the game getting repetitive after a little while. Not to mention the short reach of your weapon, and if you're using a stock controller, the non-centering joystick will cause you to walk into enemies when you really wouldn't expect to. But that's something that most 5200 owners will learn to deal with. Or you might be using a different controller and it won't affect you at all. Also, the sound effects can get a bit annoying, especially when a Gremlin gets stuck opening the Mogwai pen over and over. But there you have it, guys. I highly recommend Gremlins for the Atari 5200. What do you guys think of Gremlins? Do you own it, or have you played it before? Is it as good as I say it is, or is this game piping hot garbage? And also, are you fond of the movie franchise? Does this game make a good attempt to be faithful to the source material? Let me know your opinions down in the comments below. This has been the 7800 Pro System Gamer on behalf of the Atari Network, and I want to thank you all for watching. Stay classy, Atarians. The Atarian magazine was short-lived, and honestly it was an obvious sales piece created under Atari's guidance. But it was a neat idea, and in a different world, a very different world, it could have been Atari's Nintendo Power. It covered all the consoles of Atari in the late 80s, such as the 2600, 7800, and XEGS. And in one issue of the magazine, they had a section based on an Atari 8-bit game known as Necromancer. This was not my first time hearing about this game, but it was my first time seeing any screenshots of it. And this was the XEGS game that I had, personally, the most interest in playing. I wish it had seen a 7800 release so I could have finally gotten to experience it. But recently I obtained my first XEGS console, and finally have a way to give it a try. So let's find out if I missed out on a cult classic, or if this game deserves to be left in the past with so many other archaic computer titles. Necromancer was developed by Bill Williams for Synapsys Software back in 1982. It was released on the Atari 8-bit and Commodore 64, and eventually made its way to the XEGS via a re-release in 1988. This is the version I'm reviewing today. You take the role of Illuminar, who is apparently not a necromancer, but rather a generic wizard. And you must traverse 3 screens in order to take on Tetragorn, who is the necromancer in this game, and stop him to take over his graveyard. The story is, well, what you would expect from a game of its time. Very imaginative and inventive, with lots of fun and silly character names. But it holds little bearing on the game itself, and that, of course, is to be expected. When you first power on Necromancer, you're greeted with an underwhelming title screen, with all the relative information, such as high scores, copyright dates, etc. And there's also a tree in the upper right corner. Once you start the game, you see a wizard in the middle of a screen, and a bunch of monsters running onto the screen from the left and right. The first time I played, I thought my copy was broken, honestly. I could barely figure out how to do anything. But I'll explain if you've never played Necromancer before. So the wizard in the middle is you, and your objective is to plant and grow as many trees as possible. You use the joystick to move a flashing orb around the screen, and by simply touching the ogres that run onto the screen with it, you will kill them. But you must also use this orb to designate where trees will be planted by pressing the button. You must protect these trees from the ogres, or they'll get cut down. You will also encounter a monster whose death presents you with more seeds to grow more trees, and a spider that poisons your fully grown trees and will kill them unless you run your orb over them. The gameplay is sort of fun and chaotic for a minute, but I have to be honest, it made my wrists hurt after only a short period of time. I tried several other control methods and gamepads, and I have to say that a standard gamepad is the way to go. But the repetitive gameplay does create some arm pains no matter what you use. But one thing I wouldn't call this game is boring, as this is only the first of 3 screens you'll encounter. Once your strength depletes here, you won't die as expected, but rather move onto the second screen of the game. And once again, you're thrown into the screen and expected to learn more unique controls. And this feels a little unfair, I guess. You move the orb as you would on the past screen, but now your goal is wholly different. You must hold down the button to move your wizard while collecting question marks to build ladders and climb down them, through a total of 5 levels of these tunnels. On the right side of the screen, the trees you planted and grew are still present, and you'll use the orb to control them and run them over various holes in the floor. Hopefully they'll have enough time to take root and kill the spiders before they spawn and leave those holes, otherwise you'll pay for it on the next screen. But I personally just found it more advantageous to just move as quickly as possible through this section. If I'm honest, this is the most boring part of Necromancer for me, and the one where the mechanics seem to work the least. The spiders that spawn are very deadly, and if you're not near the bottom of the screen when they do spawn, well, you might as well kiss some of your strength goodbye. The hands that reach for you will occasionally leave and move around the question marks, but I found I was mostly okay if I made a beeline for them. Once through this section, you'll find yourself in a graveyard, which is the final screen. And by this point, you should be able to make sense of the controls quickly, even if what you're supposed to do isn't evident immediately. Spiders are all over, and depending how many hatched in the previous area, you might have an insurmountable number of them to contend with. But your objective is simply to touch each gravestone and thus destroy them. The enemy Necromancer is here too, warping all around in a bid to destroy you. Once again, you can kill the spiders and the Necromancer with the orb, and I recommend only doing this if they're right in your face. Otherwise, you can ignore them and just focus on the tombstones. Once you clear them all, you do this again, and again, and again. As far as I can tell, the game continues with this graveyard screen until you die. And that sums up just about everything there is in Necromancer. It's an early computer game, and one with some more depth than the games that preceded it had, to be sure. It's also a game that I was very excited to finally try, and a game I had always wondered about as a kid. Heck, I even wondered about it as an adult. And maybe I hyped it up too much, but I just couldn't help but to be disappointed. And it's for a few main reasons. First, the game is kind of painful to play. Maybe it's my old age and deteriorating wrists, but I can play other games for several hours and have no issues. I also found it a bit of a chore to figure out what I was supposed to be doing on each screen. And once I did figure it out, well, I couldn't help but to feel kind of underwhelmed by what the game was giving me. Now, had I played this game back in the 80s or 90s, my feelings might have been different. But being introduced to it today, well, I just don't think it's very good, unfortunately. And I do love older games, even ones I haven't played before. I thought that Dreadnot Factor and Blueprint on the 5200 were fine games, even with the stock controller. And I didn't experience those games until this year or late last year. The point is, I feel like Necromancer is close to being a good game, but it never made it over that hump of being fun for me. And before we wrap things up, I do want to hit on the graphics and audio quickly. Because graphically, given the time frame that the game was produced, developed, and released, it's not a bad looking game. You can recognize everything for what they are. It's pretty evident who the wizards are, who the enemies are, and what items you should be picking up. And the tunnel levels look pretty cool. The audio is a bit, maybe repetitive at times, but it's not bad by any means. It looks and sounds like a game that might have been a classic in another world. All the elements were there, and Necromancer has some unique ideas here and there. But maybe with a few tweaks, alterations, and additions, it could have been made more enjoyable for myself. I guess we'll never know. What we will know about, however, is what score I plan on giving Necromancer, because we're heading into the Atari Network pros and cons section right now. Starting with the pros, I want to say that having 3 unique screens was ambitious for the time, and made me stick with the game longer than I might have otherwise done so. Learning each screen was pretty interesting, if not a tad confusing. And having each screen be affected by the previous one is a smart move. It makes everything feel connected. Grow trees in the first screen that help you in the second screen, prevent spiders in the second screen that will attack you in the third, and so on. Graphically, the game is fine, and looks like many others that we consider classics of the time. And I even think the audio is well done and pleasant to listen to most of the time. But with all that, well, we're already onto the cons. And I have to start by saying that this game hurt me, literally. It's a pain in the wrist for me to play. And it's hard to understand what you're supposed to do without looking it up. Generally, you do know who the good guys and bad guys are, but dealing with the threats is not properly explained or easy to figure out. And your goal isn't easy to figure out either. I also feel like some of the screens are just more fun than others, and more challenging. Necromancer felt so close to being a fun game, but it just never made it over that hump for me. And thus I spent most of my time wondering when it would start to get good. So with all that said, I'm going to give Necromancer on the Atari XEGS 2 one-button joysticks out of 5. I don't want to offend fans of this game, but I don't think it's worth going back to today. Well, it's not worth it for people who don't have nostalgia for it. I really wanted to like Necromancer, I really did, but I just didn't. But I think you're all tired of hearing what I have to say, and what I think about this game, so now it's time to hear what all of you think. Is Necromancer worth picking up and playing today? Have you tried the Commodore 64 version? And if so, is it better? And do you agree with my score and assessment of the game? Let me know about all this and more in the comments down below. And please, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I do all Atari content here on the channel, so hit the bell icon to be notified whenever I upload. And please, check out my social media and the Discord server. Tons of classy Atarians are already there talking everything Atari with each other. And please consider becoming a Patreon if you enjoy my content. I have $2 and $5 tiers with exclusive audios and more, and YouTube members get access to videos a day early. These people have already joined, and I can't thank them enough. You guys rock. Okay guys, enough self-promotion, let's wrap this up. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a madman planting trees to do my bidding in the next phase of my life here at the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. And remember to stay classy, Atarians. There are tons of games that are being developed and programmed every year that we'll never see or get to try. There's a good number of games over the years that have been canceled for one reason or another, and some of these games were really hyped and looked extremely promising, while others never had a drop in media or press release around them, and therefore their loss isn't felt at all. There are many websites and YouTube channels dedicated to finding, documenting, and preserving these lost games. And there's one game in particular that my podcast co-host turned me on to recently. A game called Blaster for the Atari 5200. So I thought it would be fun to play Blaster for the channel, give out all the known information about it, and tell what the game is and how it became, well, unreleased. So let's find out if Blaster would have been a smash hit for the Atari 5200, or if it's a game better left forgotten to time. But first, I just want to remind everybody to leave a like if you enjoy my videos, and subscribe if you haven't already. It helps the channel a ton, and you'll get notifications whenever I upload by clicking that bell icon as well. Alright guys, with that out of the way, let's learn a little bit about the 5200 prototype, Blaster. I think it's an incredible feeling when you come across something that was clearly ahead of its time. When you discover something that, well, you can't believe was made during an era that it was, and you can almost see how it influenced a lot of what came after it. That's part of what makes Blaster so unique to me. Not only was it one of those canceled gems that was nearly lost forever, but it also attempts to be many things, and has so many incredible ideas that wouldn't be perfected or tried for another 10, 20, or even 30 years later in the video game industry. And that, along with the fact that it was unreleased, is why I knew I had to make a video on Blaster. This game should not be forgotten, and I'm going to do my part in making sure that, well, that doesn't happen. According to Atari Age, Blaster was developed back in 1983 and 1984 by Atari, and was set to be released on the Atari 5200. But here is one of the most interesting parts. Blaster was originally written for the Atari 400 and 800, but was later adapted for the 5200. Now I find that interesting, especially given that those platforms were, well, basically the same. The game was canceled, but not before being shown to Williams, who adapted it into an obscure and, well, frankly, unsuccessful arcade game under the same name. Less than 500 of those arcade cabinets were produced, and the game was, well, once again forgotten to time. That is until 2004, when Matt Reckart, I'm sorry I butchered your name, but anyway, until Matt of Atari Protos found the prototype and released it to be played on emulators. This is incredible information that I just gave out, as this is one of the rare cases where a game started on computers, then moved to an admittedly similar designed console, and finally found its way to the arcades. This makes the arcade version the port. Crazy. And the arcade was the sole release. The console and computer ports were never meant to see the light of day, and it's only thanks to Matt and Atari Protos that we're able to play it. Everything about Blaster to this point is infinitely interesting to me, and it keeps getting better because apparently, according to AtariProtos.com, this game is a spiritual sequel to Robotron 2084. Yes, this vector, wireframe 3D experience is somehow tied to the twin-stick shooter Robotron, which is one of my favorites in its genre. Just incredible. I couldn't find any more information on how the two are linked, But if this is true, then it's probably one of the earliest examples of a game completely switching genres in a massive way, between the prequel and sequel. Or maybe I'm getting a little too excitable about the whole thing. It is a spiritual successor after all. Regardless, the history of Blaster is a great thing to learn about, and I encourage everybody to dig deeper. I'll have links in the description to help get you started. But I think it's time to take a look at the game itself. Blaster, as I said before, is a sort of 3D shooter, and this was, well, extremely ambitious for 1983 and 84. But what's more ambitious is the multiple different gameplay styles and levels that Blaster attempts. I want to break down each and explain why this game was so far ahead of its time, at least in my eyes. You start the game in the robot grid, and this is probably the only thing you could argue that has Robotron 2084 connections. You play in a spaceship cockpit through the whole game, and you're flying through the land of this planet shooting, well, robots. But you're also flying through archways and avoiding enemy fire and obstacles. This game moves pretty fast at points, especially when moving up and down, but it's painstakingly slow to move left or right for some reason. You shoot at the enemies to earn as many points as possible. The first stage looks incredible, but I couldn't believe how close this game is to the SNES classic Star Fox. It just feels like an early version of that game. Like if you told me this was a crude mock-up of Star Fox in its very early stages, I think I'd believe you. This part of Blaster is fun. It's definitely interesting and challenging. And each time you return to the robot grid, it gets more and more intense as the robots take aim and start blasting at you more frequently. It's really well done, and it's just incredible what the developers achieved here on the 5200, at least if you ask me. And the arcade version runs a lot better and looks even more like Star Fox in my opinion. Let me know what you think about the robot stage, and if the robots themselves are connected to Robotron. But anyway, we have to move on next to the time tunnel. And this is where the game reminds me of Gorf a little bit, as well as the bonus ring stage from Tempest 2000. It plays so well, and is far more challenging than you might think, as your objectives slide around the edges and the center of the play area. Your whole mission here is to save these astronauts and the people as they slide through time. They scream help and their whole bodies become the words, and then they take shape as people and fly quickly at you. And believe it or not, I felt bad when I missed them and couldn't save them. It's terrifying to think that these people are now lost to space and time, and I could have saved them had I been quicker. Well, again, Blaster is far ahead of its time here, while also paying homage to Gorf, and this is something we'll see a better example of here shortly. Next, you have the outer space stage, and this reminds me of the TIE Fighter portion of the Star Wars arcade game. Ships fly in front of you, away from you, and towards you while blasting their rectangular shots in your face. This is probably the most straightforward and basic part of the game, but there is a variety of enemies to contend with here. It's similar to the robot grid in some ways, but it's pulled off nicely, and it has the same movement issues as the robot grid too, but it's still a ton of fun. Then last but not least, we have what they call the planetoid section. The game always follows the cycle of robot grid, time tunnel, outer space, and then planetoids before setting to the beginning for a new level. So planetoids, well, it almost has this escape feeling to it, like you're attempting to reach the next planet by using hyperspace while avoiding the asteroids. And that's exactly what I think of in playing this portion of Blaster. Asteroids. It feels like a first-person version of that game. And even the space rocks themselves resemble the 2600 version of the asteroids in the game Asteroids. Man, I'm saying asteroids a lot. The game seems to indicate that you're running low on energy at this point, and you have elements of the time tunnel in that there will be people to once again rescue. But you also have to grab the E in a similar fashion to the people. And when you see it, you'll want to fly into it, and, well, that's it. The screens and obstacles start flying by at impossible speeds. and the game cycles back to the beginning and the robot grid, and you must do it all over again, getting the highest score possible. Whether you're playing the cancelled 5200 original via a ROM from a Google search, or the Williams arcade port on MAME, I have to say that Blaster is extremely fun. There's no doubting that the arcade version looks and plays better, but both are worth checking out. The game plays well, and I think it should be finally remembered today, in a similar vein to titles like Rescue on Fractalus. It's early 3D done right, and, well, it's worth remembering. I saw a few physical copies on Mercari and Etsy for $250 for Atari 5200 versions of the game. These are reproduction cartridges, and you can easily find the ROM online. And for half of what you would pay just for this cartridge, you could get an awesome 5200 flash cart, which is also the same one I used to play this 5200 version of this game for the channel. So I encourage you to go that route. I think you'll be much more satisfied. While there are physical versions of this game, well, $250 is a tall ask. But Blaster is worth playing, just not worth giving your firstborn child to do so. But that's everything I found out and know about Blaster for the 5200 and its port to the arcade. But now I want to hear from all of you. Do you think Blaster is impressive? Do you think it would have helped the 5200 had it been released? Have you played this unreleased title? And if so, do you think it's good or bad? Let me know about all this and so much more in the comments down below. I'd also like to end by thanking these following classy Atarians for supporting this YouTube channel. Thanks to them, we can cover things like Blaster, as well as replace and upgrade equipment and more. You can support us too with a YouTube membership or by heading over to patreon.com/7800progamer. Thanks again, guys. You all rock. But with that, it's time to wrap up this look at the best 5200 game that most people have never played. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a man who didn't see a release on the 5200 either, but instead came out in the arcades known as the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. And as always, remember to stay classy, Atarians. Gamers today will never know the intense terror of Sinistar, flying through space being pestered by flocks of harmless workers and the deadly warriors, all the while trying to desperately mine asteroids before he arrives. You don't have long to collect your materials and create the Cinnabons you need to stand a chance. More and more warriors surround you and attempt to blow you up, but they are mere gnats compared to what awaits you. And then you hear it. Beware, I live. You desperately try to mine another asteroid or two, while you hear the menacing taunts of I hunger and run, coward. If only that was an option. And then you see him, the metallic, demonic face of the Sinistar. You release a flurry of Cinnabombs and watch his pieces crumble away. But wait, you're out of bombs and he still has his face intact. You are short by a single Cinnabomb. Escape is your only option, but it's far too late. You watch helplessly as you're sucked into the demon's mouth and crunched to death, like a mere snack to the Sinistar. This is the 1983 arcade game by Williams called Sinistar, and it was probably my and many others' first introduction to true horror in video games. But can the experience be faithfully recreated on the Atari 5200? Let's find out.
I am Sinistar. Beware, I live. Beware, coward. I hunger. Run, coward.
I love the original arcade version of Sinistar, so once I found out about the Atari 8-bit conversion that was brought to the Atari 5200, I had to grab it however I could. The cartridge was available on AtariAge once upon a time, but it's since been removed. But luckily I found a copy on eBay for $70-some and I jumped all over it. And my initial experience with the game was mostly positive, but I do have some issues with it. The title screen is pretty cool with some pretty useful options. The Sinistar logo sort of replaces itself with red, blue, and pink versions. And you use the ship to choose your options. And by firing at them, no less. Cool stuff. You can choose 1 or 2 players, your starting difficulty, the number of lives you begin with, and whether you auto-fire or manual fire. I would prefer manual fire, but it appears that I need to do some work on my joysticks, as I can't get the Cinnabombs to launch as they should in this mode. But automatic fire is just fine. It has your ship constantly firing in whatever direction you're facing, but you still have to manually release the Cinnabombs. A smart choice for controllers with triggers that notoriously fail. Once you choose all your options, you're dumped right into an asteroid field in deep space. Visually, things aren't too impressive at first, as you get a few small stars and a few asteroids all about. You have little red workers that sort of hover all around you, and you can spend your time destroying them if you want, but they are mostly harmless, except for the fact that they construct your mortal enemy, the Sinistar. You'll also notice that there are more rounded ships that start to surround you, and those are the warriors. They will take fire at you in a fast, relentless manner, but they seem to have trouble lining up their shots, which is all the better because they eventually swarm you in later levels. If you've never played Sinistar before, then you'll likely wonder about the screen, shooting at whatever you come across. You'll more than likely encounter the zone where the workers are constructing the Sinistar as well, and you'll notice more and more pieces being added to his body, or head as it were. Eventually Sinistar springs to life, and you hear a pretty good version of his "Beware, I live" line, which is iconic. It's a bit scratchy sounding, but it's not bad. Then he'll probably eat you a few times, and it's game over. So what do? Your main fire doesn't hurt the Sinistar, so what defense do you have? Well, you have to run into and shoot asteroids in order to free flashing dots that almost look exactly like the background stars. With the help of the flashing dots, you'll collect up to 20 Cinnabombs, and this is your only hope to kill the demon that pursues you. It will take 13 or more of these bombs to destroy him, so you want to make them a priority. And it is satisfying to successfully blow up the Sinistar and be warped to the next worker zone, or warrior zone, and so forth. The objectives aren't exactly beginner-friendly, but it makes for a unique experience that is complex, intense, and just plain fun. It is still true horror to hear the "Beware I live" line before you are ready to fight him, and he is as relentless as ever. Novice players will find themselves in his jaws more often than not, but quick movements and a barrage of Cinnabombs will get you through. The shooting and combat is mostly good, but if you've ever played the arcade, you'll notice the controls are off. It appears you shoot in 8 directions on the 5200 port, but in the arcade you had 49-way optical joysticks that really made you feel like you could face and shoot in any direction. It's sorely missing here, but the game is still playable. It just feels less authentic, and it will definitely be a turnoff for hardcore fans. Graphically, the game isn't bad, but it can be a bit boring to look at when the titular Sinistar isn't on the screen. He really is the biggest part of this game, and is the shining star of the graphics. The workers look pretty good, but the warriors look like lesser Millennium Falcons, and I don't know, I don't care for them all that much. But they look okay for what they are. The asteroids have a nice depth to them thanks to their blue and white color scheme, but the audio is headache-inducing in my opinion. The constant sound of your bullets firing doesn't make for great audio in 2024. I do love hearing the iconic lines of the Sinistar, but only the one is included. I always liked the "Run, Coward" and the intense screams of Sinistar, but unfortunately, those lines are missing. And I get why. The fact that any speech is included is commendable to be certain, but my biggest complaint was the garbage and visual glitches that would appear on my screen after a while, and I was certain it was because of my cart. But I downloaded a digital version to try on my Atari Max, and, well, it does the same thing. So what's going on with the graphics? Why do they start to degrade and become so messy looking after playing a while? Well, I did some research, and it appears that maybe this port wasn't 100% complete. I read a forum where people were complaining about a similar issue, but I can't tell if it applies to all versions or not. I imagine this game falls under one of 2 situations. One is that the game was never optimized or completed, and some sort of memory issue causes things to become corrupted. Either that, or my 2-port Atari 5200 has something that makes the game do this. I know there are certain games that don't work at all on 2-port 5200s, and this could be another example of that. So just be aware, the graphical degradation is something I and others have experienced, and could happen to you as well. But a bigger complaint is the questionable hit detection at times. Sometimes I go right through an asteroid or enemy when I should collide with them, and this can even happen before the graphical issues start. But it can work in your favor at times, as occasionally it seems bullets from the warriors go right through me. I guess you gotta take the good with the bad, right? Overall, Sinistar is a pretty good port to the Atari 5200, but with some notable issues. So I think we need to head over to the Atari Network pros and cons section to make a decision on what score to give this one. For the pros, I do like that the complex gameplay is mostly kept intact. It's rewarding mining for Cinnabombs and using them to blow up the Sinistar, and the intensity of escaping him is still present in this version. I also appreciate that they were able to keep the Beware I Live voice sample in this version. It's iconic to the game and required if you ask me. I also really like the way the Sinistar looks. Heck, the rest of the game looks fine, and there's even a working Defender-style map. The other ships and asteroids look pretty good for the most part too. But we do have some big cons to discuss. First, the game has progressive graphical issues that cause garbage to appear on the screen, and letters to disappear from words. And it seems other people have experienced this too. The collision detection isn't always great either, and you'll have times where you fly right through something. Your ship only has 8 directions instead of the 49 from the arcade, and it definitely makes the game feel more mundane in the control department. And the sound effects of your gun shooting is just awful. I don't mind the rest, but that gun got on my nerves fast. And while I'm glad to have one of the Sinistar's famous voice lines, I do miss hearing "Run, Coward" and "I Hunger." So with all that in mind, I feel like this game should get a 2. But the thing is, I still have fun playing it. Yes, it sucks with the graphical issues that start happening after some time. It sucks with the poor collision detection, and it's not great being limited to 8 directions. But a bad version of Sinistar is still pretty fun, it turns out. So after much debate, I decided to give Sinistar for the Atari 5200 3 rebuilt controllers out of 5. Yes, it is flawed, and you need to be aware of those flaws going in. But it's hard to call the game not worth it when I had fun playing it. Sinistar might be an acquired taste for some, but if you like it and you have a 5200, then I think it's at least worth tracking down the ROM for your Atari Max flash cart. Fans of Sinistar should still get some enjoyment out of this one, and even if you've never played this game in the arcades, if you think it looks good, then try it. You'll probably enjoy it. So thanks for watching my review of the Atari 8-bit conversion for the 5200 in Sinistar. But now I want to hear from you guys. Have you played the arcade version, or this version of Sinistar? Did you like it? Do you agree with my score? Should I have gone with 2 controllers instead of 3? Let me know all this and more in the comments down below. Also, if you enjoyed this review, then please subscribe for more just like it. We do a review every Sunday and a featured video every Thursday. Also, if you like Discord and discussing all things Atari, then please join the Atari Network Discord server. A link will be in the description. I'd also like to thank all my Patreons for their support. Thanks to them, the Atari Network can get better equipment and more things to cover on the channel. The Patreons also get behind-the-scenes videos, exclusive audios, and early access to videos, along with this shout-out at the end of every video. So thanks guys for being classy Atarians and joining our Patreon. And don't forget to check out our merch. Link in the description for the Patreon and the merch as well. Okay guys, I'm the 7800 Pro Gamer, a metallic demon put together for the purpose of destroying the galaxy here at the Atari Network. And I'd like to thank you all for watching the review of Sinistar. And remember, stay classy Atarians. I had no clue what to expect from Magical Fairy Force before I first played it. To be honest, the art design was fantastic, and the screenshots were intriguing, but I had no clue what the heck was going on in any of them. But the whole fairy thing isn't really something that would draw me in. I don't really care about fantasy fairies and Tinkerbell stuff, so that was the main reason why it took me so long to give Magical Fairy Force a shot. But with the new Champion Edition hitting Steam back in May of this year, I figured this was as good of a time as any to see how the game fared on the 5200. So is this a shining example of why we need more homebrew on the 5200? Or is it the reason why we don't? Let's find out. Magical Fairy Force was brought to the 5200 by Atari Age back in 2020. It was programmed and designed by Ryan Whitmer and has since been expanded on in fantastic ways. As I said before, I didn't know what to expect, but I was super pleased to read that this game supports the mighty 5200 trackball. I don't have one, however. But I have to imagine after playing it that the trackball control has to be incredible for Magical Fairy Force. I would definitely recommend trying that or a good aftermarket controller, because the stock 5200 stick made my hands hurt after about 30 minutes or so. That's no fault of the game, but was actually due to the intense battles I engaged in. But it's still worth noting. So in Magical Fairy Force, you play as one of 8 characters, who appear to be defending or trying to conquer Fairyland. It's mostly easy to tell who the good guys are and who the evil characters are, but they are all designed well and look unique to one another in their character portraits and player sprites. Given the limitations of the 5200 and the ambitions of the gameplay, it had to have been a crazy difficult task to make every character look different and have a splash of personality. So I applaud Ryan for accomplishing this. Once you select the fairy that speaks to you the most, then you enter an arena and begin to do battle against one another. And this is where the most explanation is probably needed. So the first player is always on the bottom, and the CPU, or second player, is on the top. You don't fight each other directly, but rather by blowing up stuff that wanders on your side of the screen. The clouds need to be blown up to spawn more fairy powder, which will increase your flight meter. The flight meters are in the center of the screen, and if they deplete, you automatically lose. If you touch a cloud, you lose more of your flight meter, and it seems to decrease over time or as you move anyway, which sort of makes sense. So blow up clouds and collect the powder when it spawns. But we still have to battle our opponent, and that's where the sparks that spawn above and below the flight meter comes into play. You want to avoid the projectiles from these sparks, and then proceed to blow them up. If you get hit by their bullets, then you lose one of your 4 life counters. Lose all 4 and your opponent wins the battle, and vice versa. As you blow up the sparks, your gauge in the lower right corner fills until it begins to flash. This is your power for directly attacking your opponent. You can shoot thunderbolts at your opponent at any time while using minimal attack power. But honestly, this just feels wasteful to me. Instead, you want to wait until the bar is flashing, and then hit the lower fire button to use your special attack. This will send a character-specific attack to your opponent's playfield, and they are usually devastating and nearly impossible to avoid. Some characters send fists over that cover the opponent's playfield, others send over some sort of pong ball that bounces all over, and much more. These are inventive, fun, and the best part of Magical Fairy Force if you ask me. In single player, you'll fight through the rest of the cast to get a text ending for each character. And it's cool that Ryan included these endings. If I'm honest, Fairy Force feels like a fighting game on the 5200. The character select menu is very much influenced by Street Fighter, and the one-on-one fights are obviously similar to the fighting game format. I don't know if that was a big inspiration or not, but it seems to have informed a ton of the game's design and elements, which is not a bad thing. Overall, I think Magical Fairy Force plays well and is unique. It would have been nice to have more control over damaging your enemies, as many times I feel like I either lose to myself or have little input in the outcome of the matches. Not all the time, but it does happen, and more often than I would like. But I definitely think there is something here worth exploring and expanding on in the future. As I said before, graphically these characters are full of personality, and I guarantee you'll find at least one character that speaks to you. I like Porkchop myself, but the kitty also speaks to the trick-or-treater in me. I do wish that they played a little bit different, with some moving faster, some hitting harder, etc. It would make these great design elements feel like they have more purpose in the gameplay. A lot of love clearly went into the sprites, and the added elements of their eyes in the HUD area is a unique choice, and different than just putting their names there. I don't mind it, and some people will be charmed by it to be sure. The sound, on the other hand, is completely bare bones. It's not bad at all. I find almost all of it to be enjoyable and appropriate, but that's why it sucks that there isn't more included. Some menu music and background loops during gameplay would have been cool, especially with an option to turn them off just in case. The audio is definitely a weak spot in this otherwise awesome package for Magical Fairy Force. But with all the great and unique elements to the game, I do have to say that I got tired of single player faster than I would have liked. After about 30 to 40 minutes, I was done with Magical Fairy Force and ready to put it back on the shelf for a while. But I pulled it back down a few days later, and I really enjoyed it again. Well, for about an hour anyway. There's some depth lacking in the gameplay, and I wish there was something more to keep me playing and invested for longer sessions. But again, I need to note that I play these games alone, and I have no doubt that with 2 players or a whole party of people, this would be a blast. And I guess that's with all fighting games, honestly. If the gameplay was tweaked to make me feel like I had more control over damaging my opponent, and maybe some sort of story mode was included, it would have gone a long way. And I know this is the 5200, we aren't going to get a crazy story mode, but I just felt like something more to help expand on and show off the personalities of these great characters would have gone a very, very long way. Magical Fairy Force feels like a good start to a franchise, and I can't wait to experience its Street Fighter II moment, where it breaks out and becomes more than I could have ever imagined. But before we get to all that, we have to fly into the Atari Network pros and cons section to see what Magical Fairy Force has earned. And as always, we start with the pros. Magical Fairy Force has a ton of charm in its characters. The 8 selectable fairies are unique and different. What little sound is here is really good too. The graphics are top notch, and the gameplay is pretty unique. And Fairy Force is trackball compatible, and I'm sure playing this game with that awesome giant peripheral is a good time. Each character has their own super move, and seeing all of them is cool and rewarding. Unique character endings is a really cool touch too, and will add some longevity to the game, as well as the 2-player mode, and that's probably where Magical Fairy Force will shine the most. But for the cons, well, I have a couple. I want to start with the fact that sometimes I don't feel like I impact the outcome of the battles. I wish there was other ways of damaging my opponent. The sound is too sparse and the game really needed some music, even if it was just in the menus. Some super attacks are more useful than others, which stinks but is understandable. Using the stock 5200 controller, I found the game to make my hands sore after a while, but trackball and aftermarket gamepads are the way to go. While each character looks different, they mostly play the same. I kinda wish there was some differences in their speed, attacks, etc. And finally, I found myself just being tired of the game fairly quickly, at least in single player mode. Okay, so with all that weighed out, I think it's okay to give Magical Fairy Force 3 rebuilt 5200 controllers out of 5. What's here is good, and Ryan Whitmer has a fantastic base to build off of in the future. I bet a sequel on the 5200 would blow all of our socks off. And also, as I mentioned at the start of the video, fairies probably wasn't the best choice for a male-dominated hobby in the Atari homebrew scene. You know, there's gonna be a little bit of that whole, I'm a man, I can't be seen buying a game about fairies. But if that's you, then I implore you to take a look beyond that and just give it a try, because it's a good game. But hopefully most of us have moved on from that childish mentality by now. But anyway, now I want to hear from all of you. Does Magical Fairy Force look like a good game to you? Have you played it? And if so, do you agree or disagree with my review? Which of the 8 characters are your favorite? And have you played the new Magical Fairy Force Champion Edition that's available on Steam for $5? If so, is it worth picking up and playing? Let me know your thoughts on all this and more in the comments down below. And please, like and subscribe if you haven't. We're doing videos and reviews on homebrews for the whole month of May here on the channel, so hit the bell icon to be notified the next time we upload. Also, check out the Discord server and pick up some merch if you want to help the channel and get some hip new threads. Links in the description. And speaking of channel support, I'd like to thank the following classy Atarians for supporting the Atari Network on Patreon. It's $5 a month, and I give them special bonus features and a shout out at the end of my videos. So thank you to Jeremiah Thomas, Mr. Shua TV, Vence the Spook, Socrates63, Ball Gobbler, Jolt 7800, Head Trauma Bob, OG Hugo, and my own Celestial. You all rock. And with all that, I think it's time I wrap up this video. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, and I've had a ton of fun reviewing Magical Fairy Force for you all on the channel. Thanks for watching, and for all the support. And until next time, remember to stay classy, Atarians. So I want you all to be honest and tell me if this is a fantasy you used to have as a child, or heck, maybe even as an adult. I promise I won't judge. You're in an attack spaceship, piloting it on an impossible mission in deep space. It's up to you, and maybe a small squad of scrappy ragtag pilots, to destroy an evil enemy with a massive, planet-threatening craft of their own. You and your allies approach the vessel, thinking you have the upper hand thanks to your surprise tactics and cautious planning. But the turrets on the top of the enemy destroyer move and take aim, and suddenly you're dodging an impossible barrage of missiles, lasers, and weaponry the like of which nobody has ever seen before. You move left and right, taking out each turret and bay, taking 1 in a million shots into the craft's ventilation systems, its only design flaw and weak point. Your allies cheer you on. Take the shot, one yells. Let's call the one that's yelling Biggs. And then suddenly, your childhood friend is hit, and you hear him scream his last, as poor Wedge crashes into the enemy spacecraft, bravely taking out a large plasma cannon as he dies. But it won't be in vain. You pull down your visor and guide your shot into the last vent, curving through the system's ductwork and blasting its core. The ship explodes as you and Biggs get the heck out of there. If only Wedge had been so lucky. Poor Wedge. I miss Wedge. Anyway, if you have had some form of this fantasy, and if you grew up when I did, I suspect you may have, then you might be interested in Dreadnot Factor for the Atari 5200. But let's see if it really does let you live out your deepest, darkest Star Wars fantasy, or if this embarrassing daydream of mine should have gone unspoken. The Dreadnot Factor was originally developed by Tom Lowry for Activision back in 1983. It was originally released on the Intellivision. There was a port to the Atari 8-bits, and the version we're looking at, the Atari 5200, was released a year later in 1984. In Dreadnot Factor, you must protect your base and a planet from one or several Dreadnought ships, similar to the Star Destroyers in Star Wars and other such science fiction films. And the first time playing it, well, I was pretty impressed by the size of the enemy ships. The amount of firepower and weapons on these things are quite impressive, and can be extremely challenging to conquer, depending on your difficulty settings. Upon starting up the game, you can choose your difficulty setting by pressing a number between 1 and 7. I recommend starting on 2 or 3, because difficulty level 1, well, it's just stupid easy. The enemy Dreadnought approaches your planet, usually somewhere between 5 to 10 units at a time, and you'll be able to tell how close they are getting by the map screen before launching your attack ship, and by reading the distance in the upper right-hand corner. The upper left-hand corner tells you how many Dreadnoughts are left, and this changes depending on your difficulty choice. The closer the enemy Dreadnought is, the faster you'll reach it in open space, and the less time you have to get into an advantageous position. If the distance reaches 0, then your base and the planet are destroyed and it's game over. But until then, you can launch as many ships as you want, which is a nice touch. I really meant it in the beginning of this video. This game really feels like an epic fight with a massive spaceship. In the higher difficulty levels, the enemy turrets even move with you, and the missiles launch in both slower and faster variants. It's really an impressive challenge, especially if you start with the lower difficulties and work your way up. Most of the enemy ships have the same general appearance, with most of them being gray with a little bit of detail and color variance. These ships are lined with turrets, massive blasters, missile launchers, and all kinds of major artillery. You'll also notice vents lined across the ship, and usually about 4 engines propelling this thing forward. You'll want to destroy the weaponry to give yourself some relief from the barrage, but to destroy these ships, you'll need to bomb all the air vents. The top button fires a straight shot used to destroy the enemy artillery, and the bottom button releases the bombs you need to destroy the vents. These bombs also destroy the engines to slow the Dreadnoughts down. You can also slow yourself down by holding back on the joystick, and then speed up by pushing forward. And getting the hang of setting your speed is a must to bomb the vents and dodge enemy fire. The game plays really well, and I have no doubt that you'll be able to find a difficulty level that's appropriate for you. But if you find the game to be boring or lacking excitement, which wasn't a problem for me by the way, well then unfortunately there really isn't anything different to do, and the game probably just won't be for you. They might have done well to maybe add a different segment or two, or maybe you take on smaller ships or something like that. But honestly, I like what they did. The sound isn't anything special, and mostly consists of the sounds of shots being fired, bombs dropping, and a few things blowing up. There is a nice effect here or there on the map screen, but overall, I think basic is the best way to describe the sound. I found the audio of your ship's motor to be irritating after a while, but most of the time, you just won't notice it if you're able to get into the game. As I said before, the enemy Dreadnoughts have a fair amount of detail, even if they lack in color variety. The ships themselves have a ton of different shapes and forms, and this helps to keep things a little fresh. You have pyramid-shaped Dreadnoughts, long skinny Dreadnoughts, super wide but short Dreadnoughts, and Dreadnoughts with 2 tips and so much more. There's a nice rolling effect for the planet on the map screen, but the player ship looks really, well, it looks like crap. It's one solid flashing color, and the only nice thing is that the flame coming out of our thruster does get bigger as you speed up. But overall, our craft just looks like a big blob of nothing to me. Definitely doesn't look like a ship. I can't tell what they were going for with the player sprite. But I guess it doesn't matter as much, as you'll be staring at everything coming towards you, more than you'll be looking at your own ship. But it is worth pointing out. So in my opinion, the Dreadnot Factor is an addictive game that works surprisingly well. Even for its age, it does the things that it sets out to do, and it does them pretty good. But I think we need to fly into the juggernaut known as the Atari Network Pros and Cons section to see if I can recommend Dreadnot Factor or not. And as always, we'll start with the pros. First off, this game features impressively massive enemy ships, and a nice variety in their different shapes and layouts as well. You'll be dodging a ton of enemy fire, and there is a nice spread of difficulty levels, from silly easy to crazy hard. The game conveys a feeling of being sent on an impossible mission against a daunting enemy very well. Impressively well, actually. The control layout is simple, and it just works. The game scrolls smoothly, and there can be an impressive sense of speed and a large amount of enemy fire on the screen at one time. But as you would expect, this game isn't perfect, so I need to point out a few cons. First, the colors of the enemy ships don't change, which makes them feel kind of like the same despite the different shapes and layouts. The sound can get obnoxious after a while too. If you don't like fighting the Dreadnaughts, then there is literally nothing else for you to do. Adding a little bit of variety seems like it would have been easy to do, but they just stuck with the one thing. I guess what I'm saying is it's probably not for everybody, and I could see some people getting bored with it quickly. But with all that said, I think it's fair to give the Dreadnot Factor on the Atari 5200 4 rebuilt controllers out of 5. I've seen other reviewers give this game a low score, and I just don't see it. Yes, it does one thing, but it does that one thing very well. And it successfully allowed me to live out a long-time fantasy, which is impressive for a game from 1983. As I said in a previous section, it's not going to be for everybody, but I think that every 5200 owner should give it a try. I have to believe that most people will enjoy it like I do, even if they get bored of it faster than I did. And with that said, it's time for me to hear what you all have to say about Dreadnot Factor. Have you played it? If so, did you like it? And if you've never tried it, do you think you will in the future? And I'm a little curious, does anybody else have the fantasy I described in the beginning of the video? Or did I accidentally out myself as a sci-fi geek for no reason? Let me know the answers to all this and more in the comments down below. And please, leave a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't already. We put out 2 videos a week, so hit the bell icon to be notified whenever we upload. And I'd also like to take this time to thank the following classy Atarians for supporting me on Patreon and YouTube memberships. You can too in order to receive exclusive content and shoutouts just like the one I'm about to do. Follow the link on the screen or hit join below the video. So thank you to My Own Celestial, OG Hugo, Head Trauma Bob, Jolt 7800, Ball Gobbler, Socrates 63, Fens the Spook, Mr. Shua TV, Jeremiah Thomas, and Huge Ass 79. You all rock, and I couldn't do this without you. And with all that said, it's time for me to sign off of another video. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a pilot for the Rebel Atari Force here at the Hidden Base, known as the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. And remember to stay classy, Atarians. When we hear the words E.T. and Atari put together, people automatically think about the Atari 2600 version, buried over stock cartridges in the desert, and the near destruction of a hobby and industry that most of us are enjoying to this very day. And E.T. Atari 2600 has been documented, discussed, and defended to death on the internet, and especially here on YouTube. Personally, I don't think that game is nearly the worst one ever made. And most people who place it at the top of their worst games ever lists are typically trying to appease the masses, or probably never gave it a real go. But believe it or not, I'm not here to discuss that game. And there was another E.T. game on Atari platforms that seems to be wholly ignored by, well, everybody. E.T. Phones Home was a cartridge released on the Atari 8-bit computers back in May of 1983, and was published and developed by Atari themselves. So let's find out if this game shares the same gameplay and style of its 2600 cousin, or if it's an overshadowed gem that needs to be given some light of its own. E.T. Phone Home was released several months after the 2600 version that was likely rushed out for holiday sales. But it seems that Atari gave developers Steve Englehart and Dave Comstock some extra time to produce a better game for the Atari 8-bits. And they used this time wisely, in my opinion. I doubt they would have wanted to port the universally panned 2600 version, but not because of how quote-unquote bad it was, but because the Atari 8-bit line of computers was so much more capable than its console counterpart. Well, I guess the 5200 is the Atari 8-bit's console counterpart, but I digress. Now, much like many of the Atari 400 and 800 games, the The cartridge that this is housed in doesn't seem to be much to look at, and the cover art of the box features the iconic alien finger from the film, rather than the artwork of the 2600 version. Side note, I never liked the box art of the 2600 version. I don't know, it's just weird. Am I alone on this? But again, I digress. The game itself is different in design and gameplay from that version, even if the quest is kinda close to the other. Let me explain. In this 8-bit version, you play as Elliot instead of E.T., but you still get to see the titular extraterrestrial whenever you want by pressing the button while standing still. More on this later. You take Elliot and explore a wide-open playfield with a wide variety of locales, including a city, a forest, grasslands, and some bodies of water. You must stick to the paths as Elliot, and you're trying to put together a phone in order for your little buddy to call his family and hitch a ride back home. There are 9 difficulty levels, and I recommend playing on the lower few until you get the hang of the game. As Elliot, you need to collect somewhere between 4 to 9 pieces, depending on the difficulty setting. In the first few difficulty levels, you will come across only the correct pieces, but on higher levels, you're going to want to check with your alien friend, again by pressing the button while standing still, to make sure the items you're collecting are the right color. And this is where the challenge comes from. Finding the right item but wrong color means your quest continues, and it's easy to get caught up carrying the wrong item home if you aren't checking in with your alien friend. But his energy is constantly depleting, and every time you check in with him, it depletes much faster. Elliot is also being chased by police officers, military men, and scientists as well, and they actually act with some intelligence. Some will chase Elliot as expected, and they simply take his held item should they touch him and hide it elsewhere on the map. But some of these other guys will stay a bit away from Elliot and monitor his actions and only advance onto his location if he touches an item. And others yet will chase him but only stay a distance away, attempting to have him lead them to the items so that they can steal them and hide them elsewhere. It's really intelligent enemy AI for the time, and it requires you to make note of where everybody is and how they're behaving. Now, it can be a little frustrating when a ton of people are all over where you want to pick up an item, but you typically can lead them away and come back later. You can also hold the button while moving to make Elliot run, but only when he isn't holding an item. This can help to get some distance between your stalkers and to help get your items home, but you can't do so when holding the equipment. Hitting the button when holding something causes you to drop it, and this is all part of the strategy of the game. If you're being chased and they're about to steal your item, you can drop it and lead them away, which, again, is fun and I like it. I was really surprised what a smart game E.T. Phone Home really is for the time. Once you've collected all the items to make the phone and delivered them to the green square in front of Elliot's house, you hear E.T. Phone Home, and you get to take control of him and take him to the forest to meet up with his ride. This is usually a piece of cake in the easier difficulty levels, and the enemies only serve to drain the rest of his energy faster. But on higher difficulty levels, this becomes a mad dash to avoid enemies and get to the rendezvous point before you lose your last bit of energy. Again, the gameplay is deceptively deep, and overall, I really enjoyed this movie tie-in game. It's incredible what a difference this version is compared to the notorious 2600 version, and it's a shame that this game doesn't get more attention for being the superior game. Graphically, E.T. Phone Home features very small sprites that lack a whole lot of details. Well, outside of Elliot. The first time I took control of E.T. himself, I wasn't aware of what was going on, and couldn't tell his sprite apart from the rest of the environment he was standing in. The Elliot sprite has a bit more detail, as I said before, but he's the exception in this game. The normal is just low-detailed character sprites and environments. I do appreciate that everything needs to be small, as it helps you to find phone pieces and see more of the environment. But honestly, this game is just, well, kind of ugly, and it's hard to decipher what everything is at times. It all looks the same in the city and forest, etc., and it's just not all that fun to look at. Overall, the game isn't a looker, but it all works once you understand and know what's going on. And the sound, much like the graphics, leaves a lot to be desired. It starts out fine with a decent rendition of the iconic E.T. theme, and I didn't mind that song at all. It's always been a classic, and fans will be sure to enjoy this rendition. At least, I enjoyed it. But once you start the game, you basically listen to beeping, and it can range from loud and annoying to quiet and still pretty annoying. Now this beeping is all in an attempt to let you know if you're near a phone piece or not, but it barely works in that regard. Many times I hear the tone and can't figure out at all which direction I'm supposed to go in, so I end up wandering all around the area aimlessly, stopping and going, hoping to see an item appear. And God, listening to that god-awful beeping made me want to mute the television shortly into my first time playing. When you rescue E.T., you get a weak voice sample of him saying, "Phone home, phone home." And this would have been a fun novelty in 1983, but in 2025, it's just laughably bad. The sound is bad. The graphics are bad. But the gameplay is deceptively deep and actually quite challenging and fun. And I was surprised how well it all held my attention, given the age of the cartridge. It works without issue on my Atari XEGS, and also via the A8 Pico cart for those who want to download it and play it that way. But, with all that said, I think it's time to hop into my mom's spaceship and fly into my home planet known as the pros and cons section, and see if this game can phone home a good score. E.T. Phone Home is a much better game than its 2600 cousin, and it's surprisingly deep and challenging. And it's fun, too. The 9 levels of difficulty allow most people to learn the game without much trouble, and slowly work up to an appropriate difficulty level for them. They use the one-button joystick very well, and once you've given the game time and learned the controls, you'll find yourself running Elliot around like a pro. I also think the rendition of John Williams' Flying, aka the E.T. theme in this game, is stellar, and I loved hearing it. But we need to get to the cons, and let's start with the graphics. Everything is small and, well, ugly. But the graphics work, I guess. They're utilitarian. And same with the audio. Outside of the before-mentioned theme, the rest of the audio is a dud, and annoying to listen to. The game can also be confusing to approach and decipher without a manual, but hey, we're living in the internet age. Download the manual and get yourself in the game. So with all that said, I'm going to give E.T. Phone Home for the Atari 8-bit line of computers 3 cream-colored one-button joysticks out of 5. This is definitely the superior Atari E.T. game, and it shows that this one had much more time to cook than its cousin. Unfortunately, that's also why this one is lesser known, and will probably always be living in the shadow of that other game. Which is a shame in my honest opinion. But you've all heard what I think about the Atari 8-bit version of E.T. Now I want to hear from all of you. Did you own this version growing up, or have you ever played it before? If so, do you agree with my assessment, or do you disagree? And do you prefer this or the 2600 version of the classic movie tie-in E.T. game? Let me know about all this and more in the comments down below. And please, leave a like if you enjoyed the review, and subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the bell icon to be notified whenever we upload. Also, I have social media, a Discord server where I do giveaways and where we all chat it up and talk Atari, and of course I have a Patreon. This channel is ran and supported thanks to my Patreons, and I can't thank them enough for all their support. You guys rock, and I couldn't do this without you. And with all that, let's wrap up this review of E.T. Phone Home on the Atari 8-bit computers. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a Reese's Pieces addicted alien who hides in children's closets to avoid arrest, here on the planet known as the Atari Network. And I'd like to thank you all for not turning me in, or watching. And remember to stay classy, Atarians. Twin-stick shooters are sort of my jam. I have loved playing them for quite some time, and always enjoy discovering new ones to try. Games like Robotron 2084, Smash TV, and even lesser-known indie titles like I Made a Game with Zombies in It are all enjoyable to me, and I play them quite a bit. So when I first learned about Space Dungeon and found out that it was a twin-stick shooter on the 5200, I just knew I had to give it a try. But it's easier said than done in today's retro gaming world, because by definition of the genre, you will need two working Atari 5200 joysticks, along with some sort of device to hold them. Well, I guess that'd be more of a convenience, not a necessity, but still. My solution was actually to pick up a broken 5200 controller with a working joystick component, and then getting a joystick holder from GoodDealGames.com. With this setup, I was able to get going with Space Dungeon for only a small $50-ish investment into the control situation. But if you want to go premium, you could end up spending much, much more. This is good enough for me, however, so let's not delay and get into Space Dungeon, the Atari 5200 Super System's unique twin-stick shooter from 1983. Space Dungeon was originally developed for the arcade by Taito and was released in 1982. The Super System version saw release about a year later and was published by Atari themselves. The original release had a dual joystick holder with it, but it's not likely to include this if you pick it up today. I mean, you can find them, but it's much harder to get the complete set. Anyway, upon booting the game, you are greeted with the title screen and the ability to choose between one-player, two-player, or a demonstration mode. Now to clarify, this game can be played somewhat with a single stick, but if you ask me, it just doesn't function properly and it's not recommended. Two sticks is the optimal way to play. When you start the game, you're presented with a map in the upper center of the screen, along with your score, what level you're on, the number of lives you have left, and a treasure counter. And that's to the left of the map. And below that you have a window that shows the current room you're in, and this is basically the playfield. You can use the stick in port 1 to move, and by moving the stick in port 2 you shoot in 8 different directions. The controls work well and are responsive and nicely done. The HUD shows everything you would need to know. Technically, the playfield is quite a bit smaller than some people would expect, but really, the small size is not noticeable, and wasn't an issue at all while playing. Looking at the map, you can see what rooms you've already entered, what rooms you are currently in, as designated by the white flashing inset square, and you can see where the exit is by finding the rainbow flashing square. You can see the location of the deadly, unkillable thief as well. When you die, you drop all your treasures, but the room where you lost all your booty is shown with an X on the map. And truthfully, the goal of Space Dungeon is in collecting as much treasure as you can, and getting out of each level alive. The treasure gives you a ton of points, depending on what all you've collected, and is your primary way of getting additional lives. And you're going to need these lives, because Space Dungeon is not an easy game. The difficulty is high, and a lot of it has to do with the enemies spawning out of nowhere, and spamming their fire fast and furiously. But it creates a great sort of balance where you can either run to the exit to progress further and just get any treasure you find along the way, or you can purposely explore each level, grabbing all the goodies you can. The thief is also picking up treasure, and even though you can't kill him, you can cause him to drop his own goodies by shooting him. This way you can sort of use him to collect treasure on one side of the map, while you do another, and then shoot him for a lot of score and inevitably bonus lives. The other enemies you come across are no slouch, and they need to be dealt with quickly and efficiently, but they all sort of look like random shapes and designs to me, and it can be hard to distinguish treasure and bad guys when you first get started. But here's the secret. If it moves, shoot it. If it stays still, then collect it. Simple as that. But again, when you're just learning, the game can be a tad confusing in this department. There are random rooms in every level that you can look at the map to find, that has a rectangle that acts as the exit, and you'll simply enter this area to move on. At this point, your score and treasure is counted, bonus lives are awarded, and you're given a silly little rhyme as you progress to the next level. Things like, "It's not heaven" in level 7, and "Doing fine" in level 9. It's cheesy, but a cheeky nod to your progress. Once you reach level 10, the game states that, well, it's out of rhymes, and that's the last you'll see of that component. It's odd, but it's a fun little extra, and it really has no bearing on anything. Graphically, the game isn't much to write home about. It's all simple shapes, rectangle level designs, and straight line bullets. But most of the enemies sort of explode into lots of little shards when shot and destroyed, and it's actually a cool effect that adds some depth and charm to an otherwise simple game graphically. The audio is pretty good though, with tons of bass-filled Atari patented explosions, simple sirens going off here and there, and the sound of your laser and enemy bullets flying about. Now, lately this stuff has been getting on my nerves, but I can honestly say I wasn't offended by the audio in Space Dungeon. It all sounded very classic arcade, and I'm sure it'll be nostalgic for some to hear. It's a shame that there really isn't any music to speak of, but honestly you don't end up missing it too much with all the chaos. And I doubt you would have heard much of it anyway with all the crazy sound effects blaring in the background. But I do have two criticisms to levy against Space Dungeon. Let's start with the lesser of the two. Space Dungeon is hard. I think I'm pretty good at twin-stick shooters, and I've always done well in games like Robotron 2084. But Space Dungeon really gave me a lot of challenge. At first, I had the feeling that it wasn't a fair challenge. As I stated earlier, the enemies had a tendency to spawn out of nowhere, and I would run into them or their bullets and die quickly. It felt very cheap at times. But there is method behind the madness, and I learned that when no enemies are present, I should shoot in the direction that I'm heading in. That way, nobody could get the jump on me when progressing to new rooms. But even when armed with this knowledge, Space Dungeon continues to be a huge challenge on the Super System. So be prepared to go to war over the treasure within this cartridge. My second complaint is the slowdown that occurs when things get hectic. You really start to appreciate the 7800's advanced sprite pushing capabilities after playing this one. And when things get busy in Space Dungeon, it gets slow. I really just hate slowdown in video games in general, and this one has a fair amount of it. It doesn't detract from the game too much, but it's noticeable when it happens, and it may have cost me a life or two while gathering footage for the review. But I think that's all there is to say about Space Dungeon on the Atari 5200. It's a neat little hidden gem that requires a little extra effort to play, but is it worth it? Well, why don't we head into the next room of this galactic jail, and enter the rectangle known as the pros and cons section to find out. For pros, I have to say that the game controls beautifully with twin sticks. As long as you have two working joysticks, you are in business, but I recommend getting a holder to make things easier on yourself. Even though this game is very simple looking, the graphics aren't bad, and there are some nice effects when shooting and destroying enemies. The sound is nostalgic arcade fare that I really enjoyed. It's easy to get sucked into Space Dungeon, and there is a lot of game here to play, so most 5200 fans should get their money's worth while playing this. The treasure collecting aspect is a nice touch, and it adds a little something extra to the twin-stick shooting formula. But we do have some cons, and first, let's talk about the difficulty. It's hard, and early on, I'd say it even borders cheap. But once you learn how to play the game, it becomes much more accessible. Still hard though. You'll need two working joysticks too, which is actually a big ask on the 5200. But you can get everything you need for a fairly cheap price if you shop around a bit. And finally, there is some slowdown present. When a lot of stuff is on the screen, you can count on the slowdown to come around. And that's really it for Space Dungeon. So with all that said, after weighing the pros and cons, I have no hesitation in giving Space Dungeon 4 rebuilt CX52 joysticks out of 5. The game is great fun, and it'll hold your attention for a good long while. There are some issues, but they're very forgivable when the game is just so much fun. I recommend it. But you all heard what I had to say, so now I want to hear from all of you. Have you played Space Dungeon before? Do you agree with my review? Are you a fan of twin-stick shooters? Or are these games just not for you? Why or why not? And what game should I look at next on the Atari 5200? Let me know about all this and more in the comments down below. And please, leave a like before you go and subscribe if you haven't already. I cover all things Atari, so if you like that, well, then you'll want to subscribe. Also, I have a Patreon and YouTube memberships, and these following people have already signed up for them. Thanks to them, I can continue to cover all things Atari, replace and upgrade equipment, and do fun giveaways. Link to the Patreon is in the description. Thank you to everybody who has signed up. I couldn't possibly thank you enough. And with all that, it's time to wrap up this review of Space Dungeon on the Atari 5200. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a man who lets thieves rob space stations blind and then I shoot them and take their goods, on a planet known as the Atari Network. And I'd like to thank you all for watching. And until next time, remember to stay classy, Atarians. I had walked past Blueprint about 3 times at a local media exchange in my town, and I honestly had no intention of picking it up anytime soon. And I'll be honest, that was due to my own ignorance about the game. I thought I had read somewhere that Blueprint was an overly complicated game that required a manual and a lot of time to get enjoyment from, but I think I had this confused with a different one. But when a longtime viewer requested that I look at Blueprint and attempted to explain it to me, well, I'll be totally honest, I felt vindicated in my previous thought. It's a hard game to explain to people around you, but luckily it's actually not as difficult as it sounds. With that being the case, is Blueprint a victim of its own unique design and ideas to the extent that it's getting overlooked today? Or did it deserve to be passed up repeatedly in that media exchange? Let's find out. Blueprint was originally designed by the famous Stamper brothers and was released on the Atari 5200 by CBS Electronics back in the year of 1983. There wasn't a ton of different ways to experience this one when compared to its contemporaries, but it was also available to play in the arcades, on the 2600, and on the Commodore 64. And I can't even begin to imagine how it was pulled off on the 2600. Maybe we'll have to find out one day. The title screen is about as basic as it comes, but when you're done selecting your options, you start at what appears to be a neighborhood surrounded by tall hedges. At the bottom of the screen, you have a smiley dude in a hat, something called the Blueprint, a start button, and the words Bomb Pit and Fast Run Time. At the top of the screen, there's 4 or so potted plants, and what appears to be a woman being chased by a monster, maybe a hunchback. It can be a little difficult to wrap your head around what's going on, but it becomes clear as soon as you move the joystick that you're playing as the smiley hat dude. You can enter houses and drag out different pieces and sometimes bombs. If you take the pieces to the bottom of the screen, they snap into place on the Blueprint, and the bomb blows you up fairly quickly. My first time trying this game, I was quickly blown up, killed by falling potted plants, and staring at the main menu again in no time. So what exactly is going on here? I'll do my best to explain it, but it's actually not as complicated as it first seemed to me. So the top of the screen has the lovely Daisy damsel being chased by an ogre. Daisy is your sweetheart, and you're attempting to rescue her. Occasionally, they knock down the potted plants as the ogre chases her, and you have to avoid these or else you lose a life. And the plants track your movement and seem to come to life in order to get you. It's weird, but, well, you know, video game logic and stuff. So, what are you doing then? Well, you're taking Smiley Hat Dude into each house in search of parts for your overly complicated and completely ridiculous device that you're going to use to save Miss Daisy. Each house has a part for this device, except for 2. The 2 houses that don't have bombs, and bombs are also placed in houses you've already searched, so you'll want to remember where you've been and where you haven't. Whether you find an item or a bomb, they'll follow you until you place the part on the Blueprint, or until you dispose of the bomb. Now you're asking, how do you dispose of bombs? Well, remember the word bomb pit I mentioned in the beginning? That's where you deposit those bad boys, and you need to be quick because they blow up fairly quickly. Occasionally a monster will climb out of the bomb pit and attempt to destroy your machine, so you'll need to nab him and throw him back in the pit if you see him come out. So you explore all the houses, and you have to start avoiding Fuzzy Wuzzy, and yes, that's its real name. You'll avoid him from level 3 and beyond, and he's just an annoying enemy that blocks your path and kills you. Once you have all the parts in place, you head over to the button in the lower left corner of the screen and turn on your contraption. You use this thing as a sort of tank, I guess, as you lob cannonballs up towards Daisy and the ogre. Once you hit the ogre, you start all over again as things get progressively quicker and more difficult. Okay, so it took a long time to explain, but when you're playing it, it's really not that hard to understand. The game can be intimidating to learn, but it's well worth it as it's actually pretty fun. I wish you had some recourse against Fuzzy Wuzzy, as he sometimes blocks your path for an eternity, and there seems to be nothing you can do but waste time and lose your sweetheart to the ogre. What a bummer. But outside of that, the game is surprisingly balanced and fun, and graphically it's a step up from most things we were used to on the 2600. Blueprint really shows off how well more complicated games and ideas could work with better graphical power. I shudder to think of what it must look like on the 2600. While the parts of the machine look like mostly nonsensical things, everything else is pretty good looking. The people have well-defined features, the houses look like houses, and everything else is bright and enjoyable to stare at. There is even a cute little interlude a la Pac-Man that plays after every other level that is simple, but helps with the sense of progression. Sound-wise, there is a nice little background loop that plays, along with a little tune that plays at the beginning of the game and after deaths. The songs and music are a little repetitive, but overall they're nicely done, and remind me something like you'd find in Donkey Kong. The alarms that play kill the audio, however, and there are a lot of them. When the ogre gets close to your sweetheart, a loud obnoxious alarm plays. When you find a bomb, a lower, but equally obnoxious alarm plays. And when the monster crawls out of the bomb pit, again, an alarm plays that will irritate you until you get to him. Heck, the sound of the potted plant monster things bouncing around is a bit too abrasive too, at least in my opinion. So overall, the sound is the biggest ding against this one. Well, that and the repetition of the gameplay. As I said, once I got a hang of the game, I found it pretty enjoyable for a while. But after a little bit of time, the thought of building the machine again just stopped being appealing. I think the game is mostly well done, but the inclusion of the impossible to pass Fuzzy Wuzzy and the lack of different blueprints and gadgets to make really sinks the replayability. And I know, this game is an early arcade game and we should cut it some slack, but it still doesn't change the fact that by level 6, I was honestly done with it. I came back to it a few days later to gather more video for this review, and again, I had fun for about 30 to 45 minutes, but by the end, I was honestly sick of Blueprint. But take that with a grain of salt, as I guess you could say the same for many older arcade games. Yet personally, I don't get that feeling with some of them. But let's break it all down in the completely original and innovative Atari Network's pros and cons section of the video. For pros, I think the colorful graphics look good for the time, and the gameplay is much better than I initially thought. Building the contraption is pretty rewarding, and I think the developers did a good job utilizing the space on the screen for different things. It's a cool idea to build this machine and use it as a weapon. Very unique overall. However, this game can be intimidating to learn, and can become repetitive and boring after some time. There are several different audio alarms that just kill the sound in this game. An old Fuzzy Wuzzy feels like an impossible brick wall that kills your progress unfairly. When taking all this into consideration, I think it's fair to give Blueprint for the Atari 5200 Super System 3 rebuilt CX52 controllers out of 5. It's a good, unique game that mostly plays well. It has a few flaws, but those don't kill the experience. If you're getting tired of the same old arcade games and want something else to play for 45 minutes or so, then this will probably fit the bill nicely. Oh, and I want to address our review scale real quick. 1 on the scale is piping hot garbage. 2 means the game's not recommended. 3 means it is recommended. 4 is excellent, and 5 is the mark of a perfect game. When talking to Vinny, he seemed to think that 3 was a bad score to give a game, and I just don't agree. See, when I do my scores, I figure that 5 is nearly an unreachable peak. The scores 4 through 3 means that the game is pretty good, and 2 and 1 means it's pretty bad. So I just wanted to have that stated somewhere, and I'll try to remember to throw it in the description as a reminder. And thanks for watching my review on Blueprint. And don't forget, stay classy, Atarians.